Felena and Sofia Hernandez left Guadalajara filled with excitement, ready to fulfill the dream of a lifetime, to see the pyramids of Egypt. A mother and daughter united by their passion for ancient history, they never imagined that their trip would become a nightmare that would shake two continents. On March 22, 2006, after sending postcards full of joy, they simply vanished into the vast Egyptian desert, as if the sand had swallowed them whole. Authorities declared them dead, and rescuers abandoned the search. But Roberto Hernandez, a father unwilling to accept the loss of his family, kept searching in the burning hell of the desert long after everyone else had given up. Then, after 4 months of desperate searching, he found something that changed everything. Numbers hand-carved into a rock, lost in the middle of nowhere. Coordinates. The last message from his daughter before she disappeared. What Roberto discovered by following those coordinates would reveal an international human trafficking network operating in the shadows of the world's oldest desert. This is the true story of a search that should have had no hope, of a father who defied the impossible, and of how love can prevail even in the darkest corners of the earth. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this one, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. In 2006, the Hernandez family lived in the city of Guadalajara, Mexico. Roberto Hernandez, a 45-year-old engineer, had worked tirelessly for 15 years to fulfill the dream of his wife Elena and their daughter Sofia to visit the pyramids of Egypt. Elena, a 42-year-old history teacher, had fascinated their 16-year-old daughter with stories of ancient Egypt since she was a child. On March 15, 2006, mother and daughter departed from Guadalajara Airport bound for Cairo. Roberto couldn't join them due to urgent work commitments, but promised to meet them a week later. Elena carried with her a camera and a journal where she planned to document every moment of their adventure. The first postcards arrived on time. Elena described the magnificence of the Giza pyramids, the colorful markets of Khan el-Khalili, and Sofia's excitement at seeing the Egyptian museum's relics. The photographs showed radiant smiles of both women posing next to ancient monuments. The last communication came on March 22nd. In a brief phone call, Elena mentioned they had decided to extend their stay to visit lesser-known archaeological sites in the south of the country. Her voice sounded excited but slightly distant due to a poor connection. Roberto waited for more news, but days passed with no further contact. At first, he attributed the silence to their adventure in remote areas with limited phone coverage. However, when they failed to appear on their scheduled return flight on March 30th, a sense of unease began to set in. Attempts to contact them were unsuccessful. The hotels where they had stayed confirmed they had checked out as planned, but no one had information about their whereabouts afterward. Local authorities launched routine search operations, but Egypt's vast territory and the preliminary nature of the investigation yielded no immediate results. Roberto took the first available flight to Cairo on April 2nd, determined to find his family on his own. He arrived in Cairo in a state of controlled desperation. His first 48 hours were spent visiting every hotel, restaurant, and tourist site Elena and Sofia had been to. Employees remembered the two smiling Mexican women, but their testimonies faded after March 22nd. Egyptian authorities assigned Inspector Ahmed Mansour to the case. A veteran with 20 years of experience, Mansour explained the challenges of searching the desert. Thousands of tourists visited Egypt each year, and some ventured recklessly into dangerous areas without proper guides. Roberto hired the services of Hassan al-Rashid, a Bedouin guide with extensive knowledge of the Western Desert. Hassan had participated in multiple rescue operations and knew the routes used by adventurous tourists. Together, they began a systematic search of oases and lesser-known archaeological sites. In the first week, they explored Baharia Oasis, where some witnesses remembered seeing two women matching the description. A local merchant said he sold water and supplies to a mother and daughter who seemed to be heading south into more remote desert areas. In the second week, they expanded their search to Farafra Oasis. The terrain became more challenging, with extreme daytime temperatures and piercing cold at night. Roberto, unaccustomed to desert conditions, suffered dehydration multiple times, but his determination remained unshakable. Hassan noted Roberto's exceptional emotional resilience, but also recognized the signs of physical and psychological exhaustion. Nights around the campfire were filled with conversations about family, hope, and the dangers lurking in those ancient lands for inexperienced travelers. After 3 weeks of intensive searching with no concrete results, authorities suggested that Elena and Sofia might have fallen victim to a fatal accident in the desert, and that their bodies might never be recovered due to the harsh conditions. Roberto categorically rejected the suggestion to abandon the search. His paternal instinct told him that Elena and Sofia were still alive somewhere. In the 4th week of April, he decided to expand the search to even more remote areas of the western desert, regions rarely visited by conventional tourists. Hassan voiced concerns about venturing into territories controlled by nomadic groups suspicious of outsiders. Still, Roberto insisted on continuing, offering extra compensation for the risks involved. Desperation had transformed the methodical engineer into a man obsessed with a single mission. On April 28th, while exploring an area near the Siwa Oasis, Hassan noticed unusual rock formations that might have attracted the interest of tourists passionate about archaeology. The rocks had ancient carvings, partially eroded by millennia of wind and sand. Roberto meticulously examined each rock formation, searching for any evidence of recent human presence. His hands, already weathered by weeks of exposure to the desert sun, felt every surface for traces of his family. Obsession had replaced method, but ironically, this intensity increased his chances of spotting barely perceptible clues. On a particularly large rock formation, strategically positioned to provide shade during the hottest hours of the day, Roberto discovered markings that didn't seem natural. Upon closer inspection, under the direct light of the midday sun, he could distinguish numbers and lines etched superficially into the rock. Hassan confirmed the markings were recent, likely made with a sharp stone or metal object. The minimal erosion indicated they had been carved in recent months. Roberto felt a surge of both hope and terror. He had possibly found the first real clue about Elena and Sofia's whereabouts. The markings formed numerical sequences resembling geographic coordinates. Roberto, with his engineering background, immediately recognized the pattern as GPS latitude and longitude. He carefully photographed the coordinates from multiple angles to ensure full legibility. The numbers read 27 degrees, 14 minutes, 33 seconds north, 28 degrees, 51 minutes, 47 seconds. Hassan used his GPS device to confirm that the coordinates pointed to a location approximately 180 kilometers southwest of their current position. The precision suggested technical knowledge. Roberto remembered that Sofia had shown interest in navigation systems during her studies, and Elena always carried a portable GPS on their travels. The possibility that his daughter had left this message filled Roberto with a mix of paternal pride and extreme anxiety. Hassan expressed caution about heading directly toward the indicated coordinates. The area was notoriously desolate and occasionally frequented by smugglers and groups operating outside the law. Nevertheless, Roberto insisted. They couldn't ignore the only solid lead found after weeks of fruitless searching. That night, camped near the rocks where they had found the Roberto began experiencing vivid nightmares about the possible scenarios that had led Elena and Sofia to carve that message. His engineer's mind obsessively analyzed the implications. Why coordinates and not a written message? Had they been forced to move constantly, preventing detailed communication? Hassan noticed Roberto's growing emotional deterioration and suggested returning to Cairo to inform the authorities about the discovery. The coordinates would provide Egyptian police with a specific location to organize a professional rescue operation with proper resources and personnel trained for kidnapping situations. Roberto considered the suggestion for hours, but ultimately decided to continue personally toward the coordinates, arguing that any further delay could prove fatal for Elena and Sofia, assuming they were still alive. Hassan, impressed by his paternal determination, agreed to accompany him, but insisted on additional security precautions. At dawn on April 29th, Roberto and Hassan began their journey toward the mysterious coordinates, unaware they were heading toward a revelation that would forever change their understanding of the previous 2 months. The landscape grew increasingly desolate and hostile. Hassan explained that they were entering territory traditionally controlled by Bedouin tribes who kept their distance from government authorities and deeply distrusted outsiders. The absence of defined roads forced them to navigate solely by GPS and basic topographic references. Roberto obsessively watched the GPS device, mentally calculating the remaining distance every few minutes. The proximity to the coordinates, possibly carved by Sophia, intensified both his anxiety and hope. Hassan noticed the growing tension and suggested regular breaks to prevent exhaustion, but Roberto insisted on maintaining a fast pace. As they neared the destination, they began to encounter signs of recent human activity. Empty food cans, remnants of campfires, and vehicle tracks partially erased by the wind. Hassan examined the evidence with the eye of an experienced tracker and concluded that multiple people had been in the area in recent weeks. 50 kilometers from the exact coordinates, Hassan insisted on extreme caution. The potential presence of hostile groups required strategic planning to avoid dangerous confrontations. Roberto, consumed by the urgency to find his family, struggled to accept the need for stealth. They decided to proceed during nighttime to minimize visibility, using only the moonlight for navigation. The desert's nighttime silence amplified every sound, creating a tense atmosphere. Roberto fought the urge to shout Elena and Sophia's names, knowing it could alert potential captors. As they approached the precise coordinates, Hassan spotted faint lights in the distance. Using binoculars, they identified what appeared to be an improvised camp with several tents and smoking fires. The presence of human activity at the exact point indicated by the coordinates confirmed Roberto had correctly interpreted Sophia's message. Hassan proposed observing the camp for several hours to assess how many people were present and evaluate the situation before taking action. Roberto, though impatient, acknowledged the wisdom of caution under potentially dangerous circumstances. From an elevated position approximately 300 meters from the camp, Roberto and Hassan watched the activity into the early morning. Through binoculars, they spotted around 6 armed men rotating guard duty around the perimeter. The organization suggested a structured criminal operation rather than a traditional Bedouin group. Hassan identified heavy-duty off-road vehicles, typically used for smuggling across the desert. The presence of communication antennas indicated the ability to coordinate with other groups or remote locations. Roberto began to understand that Elena and Sophia were likely victims of an organized criminal network. During the initial hours of observation, they saw no sign of women in the visible parts of the camp. Roberto panicked, fearing the coordinates might only represent a transfer point to another location. Hassan urged patience, explaining that captors often kept victims in separate locations for security reasons. At sunrise, activity in the camp intensified. The men moved more frequently between the main tents and a partially underground structure that had gone unnoticed during nighttime observation. Roberto noticed one of the men carrying trays of food toward the structure, suggesting the presence of confined individuals. Hassan drew on his previous military experience to evaluate possible undetected approaches. The terrain offered limited opportunities using rock formations for cover, but the risk remained extremely high. Roberto proposed contacting the Egyptian authorities immediately, but Hassan explained that the remote location and distance would prevent a timely response. They continued observing the camp throughout the day. Roberto documented photographs of the camp layout and the captors' movement patterns. During the hottest hours when activity decreased significantly, they were able to get close enough to overhear conversations in Arabic. Hassan translated fragments confirming the presence of female prisoners at the site. The confirmation that Elena and Sophia were in the camp filled Roberto with renewed determination, but also with terror about the conditions of their captivity. Hassan began planning a rescue operation, knowing it would require absolute precision to avoid additional tragedy. Hassan convinced Roberto of the need to seek reinforcements before attempting any rescue. Using his satellite phone, he contacted his brother Mamu, a former soldier with experience in special operations, who lived in a nearby oasis. Mahmoud agreed to meet them that same night, bringing additional equipment and ammunition. During the wait, Roberto experienced the longest hours of his life. Being so close to Elena and Sophia, yet unable to act, created an almost unbearable emotional tension. Hassan shared stories of past rescues to keep Roberto's spirits up, but also to mentally prepare him for possible tragic outcomes. Mahmoud arrived after midnight with 2 additional Bedouins, whom he fully trusted. The group examined the photographs and devised a strategy to approach the camp, using surrounding rock formations for cover. The plan included silently neutralizing the perimeter guards before locating and freeing the prisoners. The operation began at 3 a.m., when the camp's vigilance was at its lowest. Roberto, despite lacking military experience, insisted on participating in the rescue of his family. Hassan assigned him the task of remaining in the observation post with a radio to coordinate the retreat once Elena and Sofia were freed. The first minutes went according to plan. Mahmoud and his men silently neutralized 3 perimeter guards using hand-to-hand combat techniques. Hassan moved toward the underground structure where the prisoners were presumably being held, while Roberto watched nervously from his secure position. However, as Hassan descended into the confined structure, he triggered an improvised alarm system that alerted the rest of the camp. Lights flickered on immediately, and voices in Arabic began shouting commands. Roberto watched helplessly as their carefully planned rescue turned into an armed confrontation with unpredictable consequences. Gunfire erupted within seconds. Disobeying Hassan's instructions, Roberto abandoned his observation post and ran toward the camp, screaming Elena and Sofia's names while dodging bullets that whistled past him in the darkness of the desert. The chaos of the nighttime battle lasted about 15 minutes. Mahmoud and his men, with superior military training, managed to neutralize most of the captors, but not without casualties. Hassan was wounded in his left shoulder, and one of the Bedouins took a bullet to the leg. Fueled by adrenaline and paternal desperation, Roberto was the first to reach the underground structure. He descended a makeshift ladder into what appeared to be a bunker dug into the desert floor. The darkness was absolute, so he used Hassan's flashlight to illuminate the confined space. The smell immediately told him he had found a place of prolonged confinement. In one corner of the bunker, Roberto found Elena, semi-conscious and severely malnourished, but alive. His wife had lost approximately 15 kilograms and showed clear signs of physical and psychological trauma. Upon hearing his voice, Elena opened her eyes with difficulty and murmured his name. However, the joy of the reunion turned instantly to horror when Roberto discovered the lifeless body of Sofia in the opposite corner of the bunker. His 16-year-old daughter had apparently died several days earlier, showing signs of violence and abuse that filled Roberto with immediate homicidal rage. Elena, with a barely audible voice, fragmentedly explained what had happened during the 2 months of captivity. They had been kidnapped while visiting a minor archaeological site, deceived by fake guides who led them into the remote desert. Their captors had kept them as prisoners, intending to sell them into international human trafficking networks. Sofia had managed to carve the coordinates into the rock during one of the group's transfers, risking her life to leave her father a clue about their location. Her daughter's bravery had enabled Elena's rescue, but had come too late to save her own life. The last words Elena remembered from Sofia were a promise that her father would find them. Despite his wound, Hassan helped Roberto carry Elena to the surface. The woman needed immediate medical attention, but also careful handling due to the severe psychological trauma from weeks of abuse and the loss of her daughter. Roberto fought back his urge for revenge, focusing instead on saving Elena. Mahmoud took charge of organizing the evacuation to the nearest hospital, while Roberto stayed close to Elena and Sofia's body, confronting the devastating reality that he had arrived too late to fully save his family. The days following the rescue were a mixture of legal procedures, medical care, and profound mourning. Elena was transferred to Cairo's main hospital, where doctors confirmed severe malnutrition, dehydration, and psychological trauma requiring long-term specialized treatment. Roberto did not leave her side during the critical first 72 hours. Egyptian authorities, led by Inspector Mansour, launched a full investigation into the criminal camp. The surviving captors were arrested and provided information about an international human trafficking network using the Egyptian desert as a transit point to markets in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Roberto fully cooperated with the authorities, providing all the photos, recordings, and evidence collected during his search. However, his main priority was Elena's recovery and coping with his own grief over Sofia's loss. Hospital psychologists explained that both Roberto and Elena would need years of therapy to process the trauma. Elena experienced episodes of dissociation and recurring nightmares. During moments of clarity, she gave detailed testimony about the treatment they had endured in captivity, crucial information for the legal prosecution of the criminals. Her emotional strength impressed the medical professionals, though Roberto could sense the deep psychological wounds she carried. Sofia's body was repatriated to Mexico for the funeral. Roberto made the difficult decision to organize the service without Elena, whose medical condition did not permit international travel. The Guadalajara community came together to support the family, But Roberto felt entirely disconnected from the normal life he had known before March 2006. Hassan and Mahmoud visited Roberto in Cairo before his eventual return to Mexico. The friendship formed during those desperate days of searching had become a permanent bond forged by shared experiences few men ever face. Hassan promised to stay in touch and to visit Mexico when possible. After 6 weeks in Cairo, Elena was stable enough to return home. Roberto had taken indefinite leave from his engineering job, knowing that his sole priority was to care for Elena and honor Sofia's memory. The return to Mexico marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one forever shaped by loss and trauma, but also by survival and unconditional love. 5 years later, 5 years after the events in Egypt, Elena had made a partial but meaningful recovery. Psychological therapy was ongoing, but she had regained the ability to function in daily life and had gradually returned to teaching. She found purpose in sharing historical knowledge with new generations of students. Her experience added emotional depth to her lessons on ancient civilizations. Roberto established the Sofia Hernandez Foundation, dedicated to preventing human trafficking and supporting families of international kidnapping victims. The organization worked with Mexican and international authorities to develop safety protocols for tourists traveling to potentially dangerous destinations, especially young women traveling without male accompaniment. The rescue story had received international media attention, but Roberto and Elena remained private about the most traumatic details of their experience. Their goal was to honor Sofia's memory through constructive action, not by exploiting their personal tragedy for public recognition. Elena wrote a book about her experience titled The Coordinates of Love, where she explored themes of survival, loss, and the importance of never giving up on family. All proceeds from the book went to the foundation and similar organizations fighting human trafficking globally. Hassan visited Mexico on the 5th anniversary of the rescue. During his stay, he accompanied Roberto and Elena to visit Sofia's grave, where they left flowers from the Egyptian desert, brought specifically for the occasion. The private ceremony represented an important emotional closure for everyone involved in the 2006 events. Roberto often reflected on the coordinates Sofia had carved into that desert rock. The precision and courage shown by his 16-year-old daughter had become the symbol of the foundation. The idea that, even in the most desperate circumstances, family love can offer hope and direction toward salvation. Elena and Roberto knew they would never fully recover from Sofia's loss, but they had learned to live with the pain, while honoring her memory through meaningful work. The coordinates in the sand had transformed from a desperate message into a legacy of love, bravery, and the unbreakable determination to protect others from similar experiences. The foundation had helped prevent cases of human trafficking and provided support to families facing similar circumstances. Through her final act of bravery, Sofia Hernandez had not only saved her mother, but possibly hundreds of future victims through the prevention work inspired by her sacrifice. If you've made it this far and want to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Leave a like so we can continue sharing powerful stories like this one. Until next time.